We are going to start with a very fun thought experiment tonight. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on some different periods of your life. Every one of you is going to be able to participate in this, regardless of where you are in your faith, no faith, strong faith, in between. Almost everyone is going to be able to participate in this in its complete form, because most of us in the room are old enough to do this. Some of you will just get a start and we'll have to project into the future. So I'm going to name 4 different periods, or actually ages, in your life. And I'm curious for you to think a little bit about what life was like then, maybe where you lived, who the influential relationships with you were, what you were aiming at that stage of life, and what you believed about God at that stage of life. So let's start with the age of 5. Everyone in this room can participate with the age of 5. I want you to think back to the age of 5. Think about your parents. Think about the home that you grew up in. Quick question. How many of you lived in Northwest Indiana at the age of 5? How about that? Region rats, we call you. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it. So age of 5, I want you to start thinking about that life. I was thinking about mine. I thought, I was in kindergarten when I was 5, and it just seems like a different time. I grew up in a small town, away from here in a rural area, and we lived a block away from our elementary school, and my mom made me, I'm not sure the right way to say that, made me walk to school by myself. I would never let my 5-year-old kids didn't get to go to the bus stop at the end of the corner, but it was just a different time. When I was 5 years old, I had a crush on a girl named Amy McKinney. She was our pastor's daughter. And one time we bumped lips, which I consider to be my first kiss. So anyway, you at the age of 5, now here's what I want you to think about. Age of 5, what did you think about God? What did you think about God? Who did you think that he was? What was your understanding of God at that stage? Who was it that led you to that understanding? Did you think of them as a trustworthy source? Faith, no faith, age of 5. All right, fast forward 10 years. Age of 15. I was a sophomore in high school when I was 15. Maybe you were at that stage or right around there when you were 15 years old. I want you to think about where you were at age 15, maybe the high school that you were a part of, the relationships that you had, who was influencing your life at that stage. For me, age 15 was a very interesting year because I don't know why this happened. I genuinely don't know, but I was like the least popular kid, the kid that got picked on in school, like through elementary school and middle school. And then like my sophomore year, somehow I got popular. And I'm not sure how it worked. I did date a girl almost that whole year in my sophomore year. Some of you have heard me tell this story. She is the girl who ended up going to prison. So all of you who have teenagers who are dating people you wish they weren't, it could turn out, if you think I'm okay, it could turn out okay, right? So all that's going on. And then what about God when you were 15? What did you think about him, or did you think about him? Was it the time that you started to wrestle with reason and science and evidence and faith and God and how all of that fits together? I remember for me when I was 15, in my faith, it felt to me like it was time to put up or shut up. That's what it felt like. I'd been raised in the church. I'd been taught what my parents told me was true, and it was time to either go this way or that way. All right, I'm going to fast forward to when you were 25. Think about when you were 25. If you're not 25 yet, imagine yourself at 25. What was life like? Who were the influences on your life? What was shaping you at that stage? What experiences were you having that were unique? And what did you think about God when you were 25? I'm sure my story is not typical at this stage. When I was 25, I was a pastor here at this church. I was the youth pastor, actually. And I was in graduate school. And when I was at the age of 25, my faith was at the lowest point of any point in my life. It came at a time of great questions for me. I was a few years into this adulting thing, and honestly, there were a lot of things about adulting that weren't working out like I thought they would. The boxes that I had in mind weren't coming to be ministry wasn't quite like I pictured it was going to be. Marriage was not like I pictured it was going to be. And my faith was starting to shake a little bit underneath that. And I was being challenged with some academic questions that I'd never been asked before. And my faith was at its lowest. My understanding, my trust in God was at its lowest point in my life when I was a pastor here at 25. How about you? 25. Now, we're going to start moving out of territory that some of you are in. 35, this is where we're going to stop. Think about life at 35, where you were living. Now we're not having conversations about your parents as much as we might be having conversations about your kids. And when you think about that stage of life and moving into, a little more security in your identity and who you were shaped to be and figuring out the bigger questions of life, who is God? How did you understand him? Who did you trust to guide you on the things of God? For me, by the time I got to age 35, I had come out of the dip of my faith. And I'll use this word a little bit later, but the only word I know to put on it was a sense of conviction about my faith. Jenny and I had had 2 kids. We had had 2 miscarriages. I had become the lead pastor. I had seen the work of God in ways that were supernatural to me right in front of me, and I got to see it so often. I thought, I have a lot of conviction about who God is. So, with that in mind, let me ask this question. What is belief? What is faith? What is trust? And actually, I want you to take those 3 words just for a moment and ask yourself, are those 3 words synonyms? Do they all mean essentially the same thing? Or would we pull them apart somehow and say, well, belief is this, but trust is something else? When it comes to belief and faith and trust, what is it? And one of the fascinating things to me that I've learned when I come across different people's stories is that we use the words faith and belief and trust mostly as synonyms, and we use them in all kinds of areas of life outside of religion, and we have a particular meaning that we mean with those. But sometimes when they get used in the religious environment, they all of a sudden take a different meaning. Let me try to describe that to you the best I can. Maybe you have some experience with this. If you say that you believe or you have faith, I think for different people, that means different things. And I want to lead you over the next 7 weeks as we talk about this bystander named John. I want you to think, what do I mean when I talk about faith? Some people just talk about faith as if it's a claim. And when I say it's a claim, what I mean is there is no evidence for it. Maybe you even say, well, I could believe something in spite of the evidence. Sometimes in religious circles, that's how people think. There's actually a whole religious system that uses the phrase, name it and claim it. And the whole idea is that there's not necessarily a reason, there's no evidence, but they're going to claim something and then try to let that pull them in that direction. And they call that faith. There's a next step where it is no longer in spite of evidence or without evidence, but where I'd say, oh, I've seen some things. I've experienced some things. I've learned some things. I've understood some things. I've explored some things. I've examined some things. And out of that process of this journey of trying to understand who God is, it does make sense to me, and I have confidence. I have confidence that this is true. When you have confidence in your faith with God, you feel settled. You feel like, I have a sense of who he is, and I believe it's going to work out. Sometimes that confidence takes another step. At least this is how the progression works, I see in most people's lives, to a place called conviction. And conviction is a little bit more than confidence. In fact, ironically, if confidence is, I'm confident, I'm settled, conviction becomes, Actually, I'm unsettled. I mean, I'm settled with, I think, who God is, but because that's who God is, I'm unsettled with the way the world is around me, and it leads me to some great conviction to actually do something as I step out in my faith. And maybe this is where you start to talk about the actual step of trust. And then, some people, when they use the word faith in a religious context, they'll actually mean certainty. They'll mean you can know for sure. Now, if you take this out of the religious context for a second, let's just use an example of saying, oh, what if your teenage son came home 3 hours late at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he wove a story for you about why he was late, and he was kind of wondering, is this story going to be good enough for you? Right? And the question is, do you believe him? Do you have faith in him? And you could look at this and be like, you know what? He can claim whatever he wants. There is no evidence. And you would say, that's not faith. I don't trust him. I don't believe him. Claim whatever you want. There's no evidence. The evidence actually points in the other direction. I don't trust him. His track record in the past shows me that he's probably not telling me the truth. I don't trust him. Claim is actually not faith. Claim is not faith. Maybe you'd say, I have confidence in him. You'd say, you know what? I've seen what he's done before. I've seen how he's handled situations. The story seems credible. Maybe I'll call and check with that other mom whose son also came home 3 hours late just to make sure. But I'm prone to have confidence that his story is true. Maybe you have a certain conviction. Like you're willing to go to bat for him. If there's a difficult situation and maybe someone did wrong to make him 3 hours late, you're like, I'm going to go for it. I'm unsettled about this because I believe him so much. And then you'd say, well, will you ever have certainty? Will you ever have certainty? No. And I want you to think about this in light of your faith in God, no matter where you are on the journey, to say, what does faith look like in real life? And I want to suggest to you that faith in real life does not include an empty claim that's against the evidence or in spite of it. And faith in real life actually does not include certainty. One of my favorite books I've ever read, it actually helped me through that season of life when I was 25, 26 and really struggling, was called The Myth of Certainty. The idea that you have to have everything figured in life and everything has to fit together and you can prove it. That's not the world that we live. That's not what God asks us to do. But to know that confidence and conviction, that's what faith is. So with that in mind, I want to say this. John was a biographer and a bystander who would say, I did not follow Jesus because of faith. Now, I'm going to unpack this sentence for you. For the next 7 weeks, we're going to explore some writings of John. John was a fisherman. He was a son of a man named Zebedee. He was from the region of Galilee in the Middle East. And I just say those things just to remind us that these people who followed Jesus, they were just real life people. They weren't that much different than you and me. They really had moms. They really had dads. They really took a step. He was a biographer. He's one of the ones who writes Jesus' story. And I'm going to show you in just a moment, he tells us why he wrote Jesus' story. And the unique thing about John's story versus the other three biographers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call synoptic gospels, meaning essentially they give a synopsis of Jesus' life. They tell what happened. John's is different than that. John tells why it happened. And that's the kind of biographer that he is. He's also a bystander. And of course, that's the title of this series. And what I want to do over the next 7 weeks is to let us attach ourselves to the one who watched Jesus as Jesus makes his way through life. And John would say, let's go back just for a second. I did not follow Jesus because of faith. I don't know what your picture of the disciples are, but John's decision to follow Jesus came before faith, not after faith. And this is very important because when John talks about faith, he's not talking about laying claim to something. He's not saying that I had to ascend to believe something and then I was able to start my journey. Instead, what you see John do is be enamored by a rabbi when he didn't really know completely who Jesus was, to be willing to start following that rabbi, to say, I'll start to shape my life around him. I think he has some good advice for me. I think there's some wisdom there. I think he can point me to who God is. He starts to follow that direction. And then eventually, after he has understanding and exploration and evidence, it's based on a track record that he decides to believe. And what I want to ask all of you to do over the next 7 weeks, no matter where you are in your faith, is to embrace the journey that John will take us on, to potentially let it lead you to a faith, to a belief, to a trust that you may not have right now, that may be incomplete or insufficient or underwhelming to you, or just that you would let this journey move forward. So, when John gets to the end of his writing, this is John chapter 20, after he's written this whole biography of Jesus, he tells us why he wrote it. He says, Jesus performed many other signs, we're going to talk about signs in just a moment, in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. He said, I only have this much room. There's a lot of things out there. There's other things he taught. There's other things he did. They're all out there. But I wanted you to have an eyewitness account of who this man was. He says, I've written these things so that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, and that by believing, you may have life in his name. And I just want us all to embrace this, that we can end up in a place where we truly have life in his name. It's a life that has confidence in who God is. It is a life that has conviction that leads me to take my next steps into the world. This is life in his name. And the place that life comes from is from a belief that Jesus is who he claimed to be, that he literally is the Son of God, that he rose from the dead, that he's the Messiah who saves the world. But I'm not asking you to assent to that belief without any evidence. What John's going to do is lay out for us the reasons that he believed and then essentially try to lend those reasons to us as a bystander. Here's what I want you to see. That John helps us see the miracles of Jesus beyond random acts of kindness. So, we've been talking more and more about miracles around here. I've found that when we talk about them, some people are very inspired by that conversation, and some people are hesitant about that conversation, and some people are actually put off by the conversation because they have trouble believing in the supernatural. What I want you to see is that whenever John talks about a miracle that Jesus performed, instead of using the word miracle, he always uses the word sign. And it's a reminder to us in a couple of ways. One is that these miracles weren't just good things Jesus was doing for people who were faithful to him or good to him or right to him. That's not what it was. Jesus was performing these miracles with something in mind. And it also reminds us that I can grow my trust in God even when the miracle isn't mine. We live in a world today where people don't want to step in to something unless they've experienced it personally. But what Jesus is doing for us is revealing to us who he is. And his message is not to be enamored by the miracle. His message is that we ought to be enamored by the one who's able to perform any miracle at any time. So I'm actually going to start with the first miracle. We only have a little bit of time left tonight. That's okay. It's a short miracle. It's kind of a unique one. Maybe you've heard this before, but I think it's actually one of the fun ones and something that even was unexpected to Jesus, apparently, when he encountered it. So this is how the story goes when John tells the story. He says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother, that's Mary, Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." So our understanding of this is that Mary, Jesus' mother, must have been part of like the catering group, right? Like she's actually responsible for there being enough wine there. She's not the person in charge. We'll meet the person in charge here in just a little bit, but she's working there, and they have a problem at the wedding. Now, weddings in the first century, the feast, we picture a good party after a wedding might last for 3 or 4, maybe 5 hours. These people partied for days. And running out of wine would be, just as it would be today, like a total faux pas. Right? Like this is like running out of food at the dinner, running out of cake before, everyone gets some, running out. It's like so embarrassing that you'd throw a feast and you would run out of wine. And so, you got to let your mind go a little bit and think, Mary, I wonder what she had seen Jesus do at home when he was a kid. This is the first public miracle we have of Jesus. We don't know if it's the first miracle he performed. Was she ever like, hey, I need some stuff from the store. I don't feel like going to the store. Jesus? I don't know. But on this occasion, she figured her son could do something. Woman, he said. Now, I'm just going to suggest you don't call your mom woman. Let's just start there. I do want you to know that culturally, this was not a negative term. He wasn't being disrespectful at all. This is kind of the way, you could almost think of this as like, lady, hey lady, like, hey lady doesn't sound any better than woman. I don't know. Hey, woman, why do you involve me? Come on, Mom. Really? And your sons, your daughters, you probably had your mom do this. They impose something on you, and like that's not what I do. Like just this past Christmas, Christmas Day, we're at my mom's house, and it was we were having our Christmas on the 26th, and it was a Sunday morning, and she wanted us to have a little church service there, and she's like, hey, Greg, how about you preach a little sermon to the 12 people in the room? I'm like, Mom, that's not what I do. Well, he said, my hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. We're going to get to that in a moment. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. She just ignores him. He's like, Mom, that's not what I do. And she's like, do what he tells you. She just goes on. She moves on. But when he says, my hour has not yet come, what he's saying is, it's not time. This wasn't the occasion. I wasn't picturing that tonight I was going to have to come out as the miracle worker, the Messiah. The hour had not yet come. And so apparently he's thinking on his feet for just a moment. Here's how the story goes. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind that the Jews used for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. So think of this. You know the size of a 55-gallon drum. There's 33-gallon drums. They had these all around. They were made of stone. They had water in them. And the reason they had them was the religious practice of the day from the Old Testament that Jesus had stepped into was you would always go through a ceremonial washing. You would do that all the time. And so it was one of the laws of the Old Testament. And actually that represented something that's very important in this story. It's almost like he looked at the water. The water represented the old covenant. And now his time was coming. He was being forced to kind of come out with it. And he thought, this is a good way. This is what's going to happen. Not only am I going to keep a good party going here, but I'm going to help people see with a sign how I make everything different. The water that was used to rinse people's hands for cleansing was just a religious ritual. It was just a practice. And like a lot of religious rituals, it had become empty over time. Like then you just walk in and do it. You don't even stop and think. And if you ever, say the same prayer at dinner every night, and you're like, well, you don't even think about it when you do it. You just get into some ritual practices and you miss it. And what had happened is the things of God that had been rules for people to follow so that they could thrive in life had been reduced to rituals. And as Jesus is about to show people that old covenant that this hand washing is a part of is about to go away, it's been fulfilled, it's all over, it's time to make room for something new, he is going to take this very setting of water and make something new. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet." So they filled them with water. It's fascinating. John doesn't even tell us that it changed to wine. He just takes some out and go to the banquet. Goes on. They did so, and the master of the banquet, the one who's in charge of the catering, tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. So this was Jesus doing a miracle a little bit under the radar with a great symbol for what everything was to come. It says, then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. That's the way it's supposed to work." That's totally smart, right? Like they won't even taste the difference when they get it sloshed a little bit. He says, "But you have saved the best till now." And Jesus' first miracle that might seem inconsequential at first, that might just seem a favor to his mom, that might just seem to serve to keep a good party going, is actually named in this sentence for what's starting to emerge. There was an old way that religion worked. It had been reduced only to rituals and practices that had been emptied of their meaning. People would go through the motions with that covenant. And Jesus is saying, no, it's so much more than that. We've saved the best until now. And then I want you to see how the miracle closes up. It says, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs. Over the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks total, we'll look at each of these miracles, each of these signs that Jesus gave. John writes them down as a bystander. He kind of puts himself in our shoes so that we can see them as he sees them. And he's going to lead us through what these miracles mean and what they teach us about God and this. They were the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. They didn't believe in him before the evidence was there. They explored, they were fascinated, they looked into it, they put the puzzle together. And once they saw Jesus do this miracle, that inner circle believed. You might think that's the end of the story. But over time, these disciples are going to believe, and then there's going to be a time where some of them say, "I believe, help me with my unbelief." There's some times where they're ready to walk away from Jesus, and then Jesus says, "Where are you going to go?" And they say, "Where would we go except you have the words of eternal life." Jesus is going to die, and they're all going to hide in a room, and he's going to rise again, and most of them are going to believe and understand. But Thomas isn't going to believe. And Jesus, out of his kindness to Thomas, is going to go and show him his hands and his feet and the scars that are there, because Jesus doesn't expect you to believe without experience. Jesus doesn't expect you to believe without evidence. This life of faith, you should never say to someone else, "Well, you just got to believe. You got to take it by faith." What Jesus is doing here is laying out for us why we can believe. And so, this is what I want to ask. That following the Ash Wednesday experience that we just had this week, that sets us on the course to an Easter journey, that all of us would take these miracles one by one over the next 6 weeks and be serious, where we could say, man, if what John's describing is true, what would it mean for my faith? Some of you may be people of faith, but you're like, I just believed. I've never really felt another way. I've never thought about it. I've never had that struggle that you talked about, Greg. I've never had that. I actually want you to have some things your faith is based on. Some of you are people of faith who, actually maybe your story is like, hey, it was kind of vibrant at once, but Greg, when you describe we can have life in his name and there's confidence in everyday life about God being with us and there's conviction about what I should do, like that's not really my life. Actually, my life, it seems more like I'm just washing my hands in the water. I'm going through the motions. I'm doing the rituals. I'm hoping that if that's your story at all, that by the end of our journey to Easter, there will be a confidence and a conviction that comes to your faith. And I hope for the people who are sitting here today who are not believers in Jesus, and you have your good reasons, and when you went through your 5-year-old and 15-year-old and 25-year-old, whatever stage of life you had, you've somehow at this stage come to the conclusion that Jesus isn't who he said he was. I will be praying every day from now until Easter for you. I would like for you to take a genuine journey, to open yourself up to the idea that if this is true, it changes everything. And that there could possibly be a life in his name that you aren't experiencing right now. And my prayer for you is essentially the purpose that John put in the book of John. I want to lay this out for you so that you come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that you may have life in his name.
I hope that this has been a meaningful experience for you, even online. And I want you to know that every time that we get together, both online and in person, we include a time of communion. This is a moment for people who follow Jesus to look back on life and remember with gratitude all the amazing things that God has done, our need for God right now, and to look forward with hope, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. So now is the time to get some food and drink to represent Jesus' body and his blood that was broken and poured out for each and every one of us. And during that time, we're going to reflect together. If you don't follow Jesus, that's totally okay. I'm glad that you're checking out this video. Go ahead and use this time to reflect on what you've heard so far. And with that, let's focus on the love of Jesus together.
This is the word here in the flesh, living among the meek and lonely. The voice of God is every breath, salvation of the world unfolding. Behold him, lift up your eyes, see the Son of Heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of This is his home, here in our chest. At every door our Savior's knocking. Oh, let him in, oh, let him out. With every yes, his kingdom's coming. The sound of every saint rejoicing. Oh, Jesus Christ, the hope of glory. Behold him, lift up your eyes, see the Son of heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus. Behold him, lift up your eyes, sing the Son of heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus. Pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus.
Music is one of the ways that we creatively express ourselves and express the love of God and our beliefs about Christianity. And I hope it's been a meaningful experience for you. And before you turn off this video, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, and share button. And I want you to know that this video, this isn't the church. You are. So this week, I hope that you go and make a difference, that you go and be the church.